Hello and welcome to Savage Movie Nights podcast. I am your prom goer riding the subway silently judging the lower classes host, Adam. Joining me, as always, is my baseball fury co-host, Kristen. How are you, Kristen?
Hey, Adam, I'm doing great. I hope you're doing well.
Thanks. What books are you currently reading?
So right now I'm reading a mystery thriller called The Last Party, where it's kind of just like rich people versus the locals and how they kind of come into this town that is mostly been local for years, and it's just the rich people kind of gentrifying it, and how one of the rich guys ends up dead and they're trying to figure out who did it and why. It all takes place over like New Year's. Very interesting. I actually won it from a Goodreads giveaway, so I'm very interested to see what it is.
Yeah, no. That sounds cool. And as always, eat the rich.
Of course.
So.
And I mean, they don't eat him physically, but there is a rich guy dead, so
Yeah.
The fish might have eaten him. He was put in the lake.
And of course, also joining us is our orphan leader Halloween costume co-host, Rob. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing great, thank you. Yes, the orphans all day.
And we got to see that costume.
Yeah. If you could find a photo, we need it. What's been in your playlist lately, Rob?
Oh no. I say oh no because it's been a complete mess. I'm all over the place right now.
Well, you could even just plug the end of year Savage Content Team playlist that we just posted, again, dating this recording on the Savage Content blog. So,
you can see Rob's
probably
favorites there.
Well, not just Rob's favorites, but everyone's favorites. And so Rob's probably just catching up on what the rest of the weird stuff the rest of the team's been listening to.
That's exactly what I'm on.
In this episode, we are going to learn what happens when you don't get along with the director, how the movie Alien and an Israeli film affected the casting, and most importantly, why a man is renting a van to spy on teenagers. Because today we are talking about the 1979 cult classic, The Warriors. But before we get to all that, let's hear a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Jazzology with Willard Jenkins. Jazzology is a fun and challenging jazz trivia show where two contestants go head-to-head for the chance to win $100 and prove their jazz knowledge. Watch along and see if you know the answers. Want to prove you are a true jazzologist by appearing as a contestant on the show? Use the link in the description of any episode to sign up. New episodes air every other Friday on Savage Content YouTube channel, youtube.com/Savage Content. And all past episodes are available under the Live tab. Thanks to Jazzology for sponsoring today's episode. And now, back to the show. Before we talk about the film itself, we must first fight our way back home through enemy territory and talk about the production of The Warriors. Talk about the movie, we must start in the year 401 BCE. Cyrus the Younger had attempted to seize the Persian throne from his older brother Artaxerxes II. Aiding him were the 10,000, a group of mostly Greek mercenaries. When Cyrus died in battle, they found themselves stranded in Persia, with the way home to the Aegean Sea surrounded with enemies on all sides. Over the next 2 years, they fought until finally, triumphantly, reaching the sea. The story of their journey was chronicled by one of the mercenary leaders, Xenophon, in the Anabasis. Over the coming centuries, Anabasis would become a classic, and in the 1960s, author Saul Yorick was inspired by the story and his experience as in the New York City Social Welfare Department. He wanted to write a counterpoint to the romanticized version of street gangs seen in things like West Side Story. He took the tale and changed the setting to 1960s New York City and turned the band of mercenaries into a street gang of African American and Hispanic youths called the Dominators. They would be called to a meeting with all the gangs in the city by Ismael Riviera in an attempt to unite them. Ismael's message would be garbled, leading to chaos and eventually fighting, leaving the dominators stranded, surrounded by enemies, and needing to reach the safety of the sea at Coney Island. The subsequent book, with illustrations by Frank Mondel, would be published in 1965 as The Warriors. So, what do you guys think of that? Inspiration, that history that led to the story.
It's very interesting. I'm wondering, because obviously I haven't read the book. We don't have to get into it now because I know you read the book, Adam. But I'm curious, like how much intense it was. Like if the whole purpose was to show that the other side of gangs that aren't romanticized, I'm curious if they are more intense than in the movie. Not to say that they aren't intense in the movie, but having the kind of silliness to them with the different themes for the gangs kind of takes away from that seriousness a little bit. So that's an interesting note that I caught on to.
Yeah, no, the book is very different in that sense. It is very much written from a sociological documentation point of view. The characters are much more awful. In a lot of ways, the action is far lower. It is not as comic book or cartoonized as you said. And in general, I honestly, I only would have, the book is not something I would necessarily revisit. It was very interesting. And it's obviously this person's attempt to capture what they see as the reality of gang life, keeping in mind that, they were never a gang member. And even though he had experience in the social welfare department, he also took creepy lengths to document, like to do research, because he was trying to, observe gang members in their natural habitat. And so he was worried like that kind of like, the Higgs kind of phenomenon. If you observe the particle, your observation of it is going to change how it reacts. That he decided like they couldn't know he was observing them, so that wouldn't bias what they were doing or how they were reacting to things. So he rented a panel van and drilled holes in the side so he could spy on teenagers.
He's lucky he didn't get beat up.
Well, again, it's the 1960s. Like that just reads very differently in 2023, 2024 than it did in the 1960s. That was one of those things because he had like a very long afterword in the book from the mid 2000s.
I think it reads very clearly. It doesn't matter what year it is. We know what that's all about.
Yeah. Well, that was one of those. As soon as I heard that little tidbit, like I thought I was done with my notes, and I'm like writing that down. Like that is getting featured here. So
it's quite a choice. It's a choice.
Yeah, but I love the the actual historical precedent, and especially the fun names, Artaxerxes the second. But the book was definitely different, and so glad I checked it out and saw the comparisons. But of the two, I'm probably going to watch the movie a lot more in the future than I would revisit the book.
Right.
Just me personally. But anyway, so producer Lawrence Gordon was browsing a bookstore in in the 1970s when he came across a copy of The Warriors without a front cover. As soon as he read the plot synopsis on the back, he bought the book and rushed to a payphone to see if the film rights were available. With the rights secured, David Shaber was enlisted to write the screenplay. Shaber would go on to write screenplays for Last Embrace with Roy Scheider and Nighthawks with Sylvester Stallone. Walter Hill was a screenwriter, director, and producer who got his start as an assistant director on films like The Thomas Crown Affair and Take the Money and Run, while also writing screenplays in his spare time. His big break as a screenwriter came with the films Hickey and Boggs and The Getaway, both in 1972. He would go on to write several other films before he got his chance to direct his first feature film, Hard Times, starring Charles Bronson in 1975. Hill was also a co-writer, and the film became a minor hit at the box office. From there, he was the sole writer and director on 1978's The Driver, starring Ryan O'Neal. While The Driver disappointed at the box office, Lawrence Gordon had been a producer on both films and recruited Hill to The Warriors. Hill was reluctant as he did not see a studio being willing to produce it. But once Gordon secured Paramount Studios to finance the production, Hill was all in. Hill later said, "It came together very quickly. I think we got the green light in April or May of 1978, and we were in theaters in February 1979. So, it's really interesting because Gordon, just stumbles across this book in the bookshop and immediately goes to try and secure the rights, and is able to do so because I believe, and I could be wrong about this, I believe someone else had the option to the rights, and they'd lapsed, and Gordon came in and picked it up, and was able to, get something to happen. Walter Hill, we'll talk about more about some of his later career, but even his early career is very interesting with being connected to films like The Thomas Crown Affair and The Getaway is a very famous Steve McQueen movie.
Yeah, I need somebody like that to stumble upon some of my favorite books. Maybe not him specifically, but I need someone to just stumble upon some of my books and be like, I'm going to turn this into a movie.
Yeah.
So
Well,
cool.
it's it's interesting, that again, it's all about right place, right time. Not just for Gordon to get the rights, but Hill was the right person to be in the project because he and Gordon had already worked together. So it's just how, these things all kind of come together and coalesce. Production took place over approximately 60 days of shooting, mostly from sundown to sunset. Hill had wanted to cast an all African American and Hispanic cast as in the book, but the studio refused to have the main cast be all non-white. The actors playing the Warriors were put through a stunt school before filming. This was done so fight scenes could be more realistic with the actors clearly visible, and so the cast could bond. It was one of several techniques that were used to force the Warriors closer together so they might form the close bonds off screen that they needed on screen. This is something numerous directors have used for many films, such as National Lampoon's Animal House and Revenge of the Nerds. Music was handled by Barry Dvorak. Dvorak had started as a songwriter in the 50s and 60s, writing several hits for artists like Marty Robbins, Johnny Burnett, and Dorsey Burnett. In the 1970s, Barry had begun working in film and television, including writing the theme for the show SWAT in 1975, and he had previously worked on Hard Times with Hill and Gordon before joining them on The Warriors. For this project, he'd wanted to use synth rock throughout the film. To go along with this score, there are several needle drops that tie into the plot. At the end of the film, the song In the City is performed by Joe Walsh. The song had been written by Walsh and Dvorak specifically for the film, but Walsh's band, the Eagles, liked the song so much that they recorded their own version of it for their 1979 album, The Long Run, which is an ironic name because it turned out the Eagles at the time were not ready for the long run as they went on a approximately 15-year hiatus after that album's release.
But
So,
also, the Warriors are on a long run throughout the movie.
Ooh,
yeah,
this is true.
yeah.
This is
No,
true. Real quick though, the original score. I mean, the original music
mhm.
score is brilliant. I think that as is the needle drops of the songs.
Yeah.
Some of them that we all know, other ones that maybe are a little bit more obscure, but they were also perfectly placed. But I cannot reiterate enough the score was just brilliant for what it is and put you in right that time period.
Exactly. And, we'll talk more about the music as we go along the film and, get to some of it. But the score was great. The needle drops were perfectly selected, and even when it's a song, they were usually choosing an off version of it, and obviously a lot of that probably had to do with budget reasons.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that still made it feel interesting and different. Also,
I just wanted to add. I'm sorry to cut you off, but the idea of having such a mixed cast racially, it's funny that how thought out that was at that time and sort of the reasonings behind it. For me, I got to tell you, it really, as a kid when I'm watching this, it made me believe it more. Like, I lived in the city of Chicago, but I also went to New York a lot because that's where my dad was at. So I went back and forth. So I was very familiar with the atmosphere. This was the way I was growing up. And that actually, the sort of the forcing of city kids together in different situations, that actually made a lot of sense for me. Except for some obscure little side gangs that were kind of laughable that you'll see in the movie, which are fun to kind of point out. They have their reasons for being there, but the actual main cast and what it was, to me in that era, that was very believable.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because uh, you see around this time, you do see in movies, a lot of multi-ethnic gangs, and that usually is a case, sort of like in this, where it's Hollywood, kind of whitewashing some of it because they don't feel comfortable doing all ethnic, but to your point, that still ends up reflecting a reality to a lot of people, where there is a lot of mixing and a lot more melding of the ethnicities than some people like to admit.
Yeah, and I know when it comes to as for like that the big opening scene that we'll get to later, I know a lot of it was just like people off the street, extras, or even people that were in gangs in New York that would sometimes join in this to help represent like it accurately, which I think is a really cool detail.
That would be one of the things that like my cousins and I, because we were obsessed with this movie as kids, and to the point where we'll get to who I was for a Halloween character, but one of the things we would do with the opening scenes was just point out, oh, that's a real guy, like that's a real one, that one isn't, that's a real one, that's a plant, and
that's
you can kind of you can tell in the background like who had that look, like, oh, that's real.
That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, well, and as you said, we can get more into some like production trivia and stuff as we go through the actual plot here in a minute, but it's just There is part of me that does wonder, what the movie would have been like, if they had been allowed to, go a little bit more with their vision. But, at the same time, you can't, argue with results. So anyway, uh, so part of, we mentioned earlier that, very compressed time frame, 60-day shooting, that, they were greenlit in around May or so and in theaters in February. Part of the reason for such a compressed production schedule was there was another film in production at the same time called The Wanderers that dealt with a gang of Italian American teens in 1963 New York. While the only similarity between the two projects were both involved gangs, although with completely different depictions and a somewhat similar sounding name, Paramount was adamant that the Warriors needed to come out first. To achieve this, they had 3 editors in 3 different editing suites cutting the film as soon as it was shot. This was an unusual setup, especially in the days before digital filmmaking. Finally, several ideas Hill had for the opening weren't realized, at least not for the initial release. Walter had wanted to have narration from Orson Welles telling the story of the 10,000, but the studio balked at the additional cost. Hill had also wanted to have sometime in the future on the screen during the opening, but again, the studio said no, citing fears it was too similar to Star Wars. Finally, Walter had wanted to use comic book art transitions throughout the film, but again, the studio wouldn't give the budget. For the ultimate director's cut in 2005, Hill returned all these elements, with the director himself recording the narration, as Wells had been dead for 20 years and thus unavailable. With all that, by February 9th, 1979, they were ready for opening night. So let's buy our ticket and talk about the release, about the film itself. Kristen?
Yeah, so the film itself starts out with this midnight summit. So it's arranged by the gang leader Cyrus. He runs the Gramercy Rifts. They're like the big gang in town, the most powerful one in New York City. And everyone is supposed to send 9 unarmed delegates to Van Cortlandt Park to meet up for this meeting. So the gang that the film focuses on, obviously, are the Warriors. They are the main characters of this, and they send their 9 people, which include the leader Warlord Cleon, second in command War Chief Swan, the scout Fox, the graffiti artist Rembrandt, quick-tempered Ajax, soldiers Snow, Cowboy, Cochise, and Vermin. So, go ahead.
For those, you know what, real quick though, for those who are really not familiar with like the layout of New York City, you have to really appreciate that like it's this is like really like asking you to go from the furthest point of one end of your city to the outskirts of the other end, where it's a huge pain in the ass to get to. And so like it's a challenge in itself. If it was just like a regular venture, that's one thing. So I just want to put that in perspective, because that's kind of important to realize here.
Yeah.
And they represent it well. They've got the like map kind of that they show at one point on the train that kind of show that they've got a lot of way to go. So I think that, I think that's very important to remember. Just the setup of like how New York is, and the importance of public transit. Because for anyone that isn't listening that doesn't live in a city, this is something that is heard about, but maybe you don't regularly take public transit. But this is like a staple. It sounds like, right, Rob? I mean, everybody just took the trains.
Yeah. There's no
subway,
need for
whatever.
a car whatsoever. I mean, even to this day, if you're in Manhattan or in the city, but yeah, particularly in those days, it was I feel like it was even more important to daily life.
Yeah, it was something like 30 miles from from Coney Island to the meeting point, which, if you're not a city person, that doesn't seem huge, but like getting back to the origins of the book, part of what they were, what York was deliberately trying to do was show just how unfamiliar most of these kids were with anything that wasn't their few blocks
Yeah, yeah.
of territory.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so,
And I think that New York being, not landlocked because there's different islands, that makes it, the train become these tunnels that there's only a few ways to get to some of these destination points that lead to more destination points.
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But it's just, very fascinating, and perfect how it worked out, as well, where you could have Coney Island as this thing on the water, uh, like even if say um, you know Dallas or Oklahoma City had a similar type of gang setup, and you had gangs, traveling a similar kind of distance. Um, it wouldn't end up having the same impact, thematically to the story, to the callback to the 10,000, because you wouldn't have the water involved the
Right.
same way.
And the setting, it's so integral to the whole story and everything, because I mean, this opening scene really does show how everybody's coming from somewhere else. Everybody is coming differently. All the gangs have their own unique thing about them, their own kind of vibe. And it's very interesting to see, like, it's very much like everybody all coming to the center, because and then once you mention the 10,000, it's just like an astronomical number, because like later on, once the actual meetup starts with the where Cyrus decides he's going to propose this truce because he wants to control the city as one unit, he tells them that they outnumber the cops 3-1. So basically, they'd be more powerful together. They would be able to take over because they are just so there's so many more of them than the people who can stop them, which is kind of a scary thing to think about, but it's interesting. And it's very cool because despite all of these gangs having their thing that they like, and they like being independent, a lot of them are kind of for the idea, which is really cool. Except for one. There's one man, the man that starts this whole thing, starts the plot. He gets the plot going. His name is Luther. He is the leader of the rogues, and instead of talking, he decides to just shoot Cyrus dead. And that kicks off the entire film. And so, I mean, we've kind of already talked a bit about what the opening is like, but what did you guys think of that big scene in the park?
I thought it was impressive, especially, this is the, 1970, late 1970s, so everything is so practical. Like a lot of this crowd scene today would be, CG, whereas they had to have all these actual thousands of people
Mm-hmm.
there in person. And, to Rob's point, this is where you get some of the that's a real one, that's not. But also because they were worried about like real stuff popping off when they have the chaos going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't want people like running into each other and maybe causing some static. And also just, that could cause problems for the shot itself. So they actually like carefully, like the AD like carefully arranged, like, okay, everybody on this level is like running to the left. Okay, next row up, everybody is running to the right. Next row up, everybody's running to the left. And especially, like with how it blends together in the shot, it looks like they're all, you know, passing and bumping into each other, but
Yeah,
they're actually got clear lines to just keep running. And it also helped them make their numbers seem bigger because they were able to loop people. They were
right,
able to loop the whole groups.
right.
So, it meant, that was the other part of the key was the loop needed to keep going without people piling up and to keep
Now,
going around. So,
yeah, and keep in mind, you're seeing thousands of people. However, you're seeing every 9 people dressed the same way because there was only 9 delegates from each gang that were supposed to go. So
mhm.
that makes it like that scene is super impressive because you really can see the all the different types of gangs, knowing that they're limited to 9, and your imagination runs wild about truly how many people are there.
Yeah.
You're seeing some of the people, and I think that you even see some of the realness of like the fact that they hired people who were real gang members or just street dudes, probably aggravated at the process of production and just waiting around. You know how people just get impatient and get a little aggravated and agitated. I think you even see some of that going on. Maybe a few people were bored, but you see it in the beginning when what's his name starts talking, the head of the Gramercy Riffs. What is his name again? The one who
Cyrus.
Thank you, sorry. How could I forget? He that was super believable, powerful. And then, like you said, the guy who kicks off the real plot by assassinating Cyrus, Luther. His real name is an actor named David Patrick Kelly. That he's sort of instantly recognizable if you in any of these roles. But this is probably the guy, especially towards the end of the movie, for a super famous scene. We'll get to that. But David Patrick Kelly, this really kicked off his whole career, and the director Hill ends up rewriting a part specific for Kelly in 1982's 48 Hours. And they even named the character Luther again, just because I guess was very impressed with this actor and his I think his capabilities on pop culture, which played out, I think, correctly. He would go on to play other henchmen and villains in films like Dreamscape, Commando, The Crow. He would also appear in TV shows like Twin Peaks, Moonlighting, Ghost Rider, and most recently he appeared in the first 2 John Wick movies and Succession. So pretty successful career.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that he was in The Crow, but now, like when you said villainous henchman, I'm like, oh, he's probably one of those sleazeballs in that movie because I love that movie,
Yeah.
but I can't picture him. But
He's
yeah,
well, because he's older by then, because that's like 15
Yeah.
years or so after
Right.
this. He plays T-Bird. That if so, like Michael Wincott, the guy with the deep gravelly voice, is like the leader of like the overall leader. But T-Bird is like the leader of the thugs who initially kill Eric Draven. You know, uh,
yeah.
uh, you know, what lovely pornography is the same guy as,
I don't know how music based that one is. It's got some music. We should
no,
definitely throw that in
no,
because I love The
it's
Crow.
definitely on the list because,
Yeah.
it had a famous soundtrack when it was released. It also, Eric Draven is a musician and, so it's got, that connection to music and, it can't rain all the time. So,
Yeah, well, I didn't mean to get it off track there, but from saying we were talking about Cyrus a little bit earlier, and there was a couple of things I really wanted to highlight about my first impressions because you guys had both already seen this movie. This was my first time, and I had not really known anything about it, and so it was very interesting to get thrown in this introduction like this. Because the way that it was like set up with like just cutting between different members having these conversations, I noticed that it was like the acting was kind of weird in the beginning. It got better, but in that beginning, I was like, they don't seem like they care about anything. But maybe that's like the vibe with the gang, whatever.
So give your thoughts, and we can touch on a couple things there.
Right. And so one of the big things I thought immediately was this, like they're hyping up this Cyrus guy so big time. And so the fact that he just got taken out like right away, I was like, oh, okay, so what are we doing now? So it was very interesting because you can see how much charisma Cyrus has. I mean, he's able to command all these big people. And so obviously we haven't talked about one of the iconic lines from the movie where he asks, "Can you dig it?" I never knew its origins. Like I didn't know that came from this. I've heard that 100 times, but I never knew it came from the Warriors. So that was cool to make a discovery.
Well, so like that is an iconic speech, like the whole thing, but especially the "Can you dig it?" And just oozing with charisma. It just so awesome. And again, getting back to like the compare and contrast, not just with the book, but especially with Saul Yorick's feelings on the movie. In the book, it's that in the movie whether he's he's amplified so everyone has no trouble understanding him. In the book, like everybody's playing a game of telephone and the message gets muddled, and that's what leads to fighting and chaos breaks out. And it's never explicitly stated, but it's kind of implied that Ismail, the version of Cyrus, they're basically the same character, dies. But as opposed to this, where it's never clear Luther's motives for wanting to shoot Cyrus, whether he was working for the cops or, just own selfishness or what. But so that's a little different. And then Saul, felt that, the speech was really cheesy and the guy was unrealistic and couldn't act to save his life. Where I remember hearing that opinion, I was like, he's one of the best parts of the movie. Like, what are you talking about?
Right. It's so interesting. And I think I remember when I was looking into background stuff, I think they initially had they wanted an actual gang leader guy to do that part, but then like the day they were going to shoot it, they couldn't find him. He just didn't show up. So they had to kind of quickly find somebody else. And then I forget the actor's name who plays Cyrus, but he does it.
I think you end up with a gang leader that looks like he's attempting to cross over a bit into politics. So that's sort of like to me, that's sort of like the cover. And before you get too deep, he gets shot anyway. So
yeah, well, it's also he feels like a character that could have been out in a blaxploitation movie from the time,
Yeah.
And so that's where it just felt very much of the time and very fitting.
Yeah. So after Cyrus is shot, obviously there's chaos. We've kind of talked about how the chaos looked on screen, and they had a coordinated way to make it look chaos without actually hurting anybody, hopefully. And it's like in the midst of this chaos, there's also police raiding this summit. And Luther, the guy who shot Cyrus, he sees that one of the warriors saw him do it. So to avoid suspicion, he immediately accuses the warriors of the murder, and he's yelling like, "The warriors did it!" And this leads the gang, the Rifts, that they are the ones who with Cyrus. And so they start attacking the warriors' leader, Cleon, and the other warriors are able to escape the chaos, and Swan kind of takes charge. But they have no idea that they've just been implicated in Cyrus's murder. They have no idea that their leader was just attacked and killed. They're just thinking, well, that was crazy. Time to get home. And so obviously the Rifts want to get revenge for their leader. So they put out a hit on the warriors through a radio DJ. And this is where we get the first needle drop of Nowhere to Run that's played with the announcement. And then we see the gangs kind of all banding together, and they begin their hunt for the warriors. Very, very interesting area there, very chaotic. You mentioned we don't really get Luther's reason. Honestly, I think the dude's just chaotic. He's just looking for chaos. He's crazy.
He does tell you towards the ending. I mean, he just said
he just kind of says because he could,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, totally. By the way, here's one thing that I think a lot of guys will notice. I don't mean to be sexist or anything like that. I just feel like this is one of those macho things that guys do. The warrior leader who gets blamed and then gets pounced on and killed incorrectly, unjustly, that dude can fight. Like in the beginning, you see him start to fight back, and like you kind of like you realize why he's the head of the warriors. Of course, he gets the beat down and he's gone. But I remember that being an impressive moment, and that set the tone for like, oh, this movie is going to have some hand-to-hand combat, and it does. Like it's a really good jump off to this expectation, or maybe even this this fear that you're about to get jumped at any moment and you have to make it your way home.
Right. And had it been even like 20 against one, he might have had a good shot. But since it was like 100 against one, like it was inevitable, like you can
Right.
only do so much.
No, totally, totally.
Yeah, it's interesting with the whole like needle drop scene. It's something that I instantly noticed because Greg and I just watched John Wick 4 a couple months ago, and there is a like part in that movie that is just almost identical to this, of a person doing like a radio announcement for a hit so that all the other people will go and get John Wick. And as soon as it happened, I was
Yeah.
like, that must have been what this is like. It must have been inspired from the Warriors. So it's really cool to see this,
Oh.
how this movie has really referenced and been used in so many other movies.
So
Yeah.
I love it for a couple of reasons. First of all, in those days, your radio was sort of that social media, that was your Twitter. Like you would find out, depending on what radio you're listening to, you could get like some stories of what's happening in the hood or in your city from that DJ along with good music. So this movie does a good job of sort of reenacting or having these moments of needle drops along with the radio announcer, because what you realize is the radio announcer who she's played by Lynn Thigpen, and I'll get to her in just a second. She's the DJ announcer. She does a great job of sort of setting the tone for you as the viewer, but also for the city, and giving you the expectation of what these other gangs, what their marching orders are, now that the Warriors have been identified as the bad guys, if you will, or the ones who killed Cyrus, why you need to take them down and what the status is, sort of on a you get the feeling that it's on a almost kind of every song she has an update, or at least every couple of times an hour she has this kind of update throughout the night. So Lynn Thigpen, she had already experienced success on Broadway and appeared in a film version of Godspell prior to this movie. She would go on to appear on Lean on Me with Morgan Freeman in '89 and win a Tony in 1997 for performance in An American Daughter. But depending on how old you are, you definitely really, really remember her because, back up for a second, in the movie you actually don't even see her full face. You only see a close up of her mouth and her lips because she's a DJ doing these announcements. But you know this voice really well, and you've kind of seen these shots before. If you were a fan of a show on PBS called Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Like instantly you just know her, you know the voice. So that's a really cool caveat and treat for people who come from that era. That also, by the way, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego was based off a computer game of the same name. She was also Luna, the moon, on Bear and Big Blue House. Fortunately, she was great. She died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 2003 at the age of 54. But that was Lynn Thigpen.
And Rob, you mentioned like you don't see her face. That wasn't the original plan. That was decided in editing.
Yeah, she didn't know that.
She wasn't ugly. Why?
No. It was just a stylistic choice.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it was a vibe.
Yeah,
I think it worked really well. It added a little
Yeah.
mystery.
It did. Well, and one thing I forgot to mention, we were talking about in the previous section. So, Kristen, you had mentioned the acting seemed a little off in those opening scenes between the Warriors. That's because those were all improvised last minute. So they'd shot at a completely different original opening scene that took place in Coney Island during the daylight. And it was the gang and Cleon's girlfriend was there, and she was played by I don't remember her name. I have it somewhere in my notes, but it's Sidney Poitier's daughter. And they decided, again, because they're editing things as they're going, and someone in the production, I can't remember who, was just really insistent to Hill, like, hey, we can't have this starting. Like we can't have this shot of daylight before we get going, because like if you watch the movie, it's not until you reach the finale that you finally see daylight. Everything else is at night, and so they decide
that's very powerful. Like that works really well. That point,
Yeah.
really does.
Exactly.
It was a good choice.
But that meant they had to reshoot. They had to rush these reshoots with this tight schedule. And so they also decided to condense, like they felt like there was just too much exposition going on. Like they were just given too much detail in that opening scene.
Got it.
Like there was, a little too much of like, well, as you know, you're my war boy, and kind of
Right,
stuff.
set
So
up.
they made the setup, to me, I feel like the opening they did end up going with is a little more natural. Like it feels a little more real. Like I didn't think the acting was bad. I thought like it reflected the nerves and what would be going on with those characters in the moment. But that was
You
just
first
me.
told me about this a couple weeks ago, and I'm a huge fan of this movie, and I didn't
Yeah.
even know about this alternative. Now you can see that now, right, on these new re-releases that are coming out.
So that scene isn't in the re-release. Like they didn't put that back in. That is like a deleted scene you can see in special features. And I
Okay.
watched a couple documentaries where they referred, like not documentaries, but like making of featurettes. They were working on this as they went. They had 3 editing suites going, which I mentioned is very unusual pre-digital editing. And that's because for I don't want to make assumptions, so I apologize for those who feel like I'm over explaining. But this is I don't want to assume people know how editing might have worked pre-digital. So you actually had to take the film, develop the film, and then physically cut. And that was not just cost, but it took time and was a lot more resource intensive than editing digitally is. And so to have multiple people working on it at the same time was a lot more expensive than it would be today, and a lot more effort. And so that's a big part of why it was really unheard of to be in that kind of rush.
Very cool.
On a project.
Very cool. So here we are, the Warriors on the run.
Yes, they are on the run now. So now they've got the hit thrown out on them, and they don't know that they've got the hit, but they are, because pretty much right away they are run down by the Turnbull ACs, and they're in like this modified school bus running after them. The Warriors are able to escape and board the train as they're trying to kind of get back to Coney Island, as we've mentioned. They think they're home free after the Turnbull ACs are unable to apprehend them, but they're kind of like, huh, that was weird. Like, I wonder why that happened. I guess they're all turned like keyed up from the meeting, and they don't know that this is just the beginning of their adventure.
And the Turnbull ACs, right? They're like all these guys on the bus. They're a bunch of like you see like 50 skinheads with chains and bats, in a bus all going out. It was crazy.
Yeah, and especially for them, of course they know like that other gangs in an area. I'm sure they were on alert in some capacity, but to have them all of a sudden like run them down for seemingly to them no reason, I'm surprised that they weren't on some more of an alert after that. I guess just because gang life, it's what you expect.
Yeah, no, the Turnbull ACs, especially to Rob's point, are very Mad Max, and that this movie is technically pre-Mad Max. The original Mad Max actually comes out like a few months after this. But and a lot of the gang types we think of as Mad Max really don't show up for the first time until the Road Warrior, the sequel. So the Warriors is very much a prototype in that. And yeah, no, to Kristen's point, they don't see anything. They think this is just more part of the chaos step, like that the truces that had allowed them to pass all the way up there in safety have collapsed. And so they, just seem to think that they're not getting attacked because they're special. They're getting attacked because of the chaos post conclave.
Right,
So.
exactly. And then, of course, when they're on the train, it gets stopped because of a fire that's set alongside the tracks, and so they end up getting stranded in Tremont. And so they are there trying to figure out what to do. Like they're like, I guess we'll just walk from here. But I also want to point out that meanwhile, they kind of like the movie cuts to this part with the rogues where they are basically assuring each other like that they're in the clear and that everyone's looking for the warriors, not them, that they have nothing to worry about. Which is just like an interesting thing to kind of cut into there, because in Tremont, they are walking, just kind of trying to get to where they want to go, and this is where they encounter the orphans. This is Rob's favorite gang. They were excluded from Cyrus's meeting because they were basically like too low on the gang hierarchy, basically. But they're really desperate for recognition. They just want to be treated the same as everyone else. They're trying to look tough on their turf. And it's in this scene that we meet Mercy, which is like the girlfriend of the orphans leader, and she's instigating a confrontation. She's talking a lot of trash, making chicken noises at him. And this leads to the orphans eventually trying to start something, but it doesn't really go anywhere. The warriors get away quickly. They throw a Molotov cocktail and they run to the nearest subway station. And despite Mercy kind of giving them grief before, she ends up going with them and joining them on the subway train. So let's talk about the orphans. Go, Rob.
I love Mercy. And just a second, right before Mercy, though, what has emerged as the new leader, who has emerged as the new leader of the Warriors, at least for this evening and on the way home in the situation, is a character named Swan, played by Michael Beck. He's awesome, and he's a hard-nosed, tough guy. We mentioned earlier about a mixture of different races in here, and if you're going to be a white guy in this gang, you have to be a tough guy. He played a tough role. Like, he kicked ass. I loved him. But yeah, no. Michael Beck. It came to the attention of Walter Hill when Hill was casting Alien, which was released a few months after The Warriors in 1979. Hill was a producer and uncredited screenwriter on the film. When looking at Sigourney Weaver for the role of Ripley, Hill watched an Israeli film called Madman that had featured Weaver and Beck as the leads. Weaver got the part in Alien, and Hill decided to cast Beck for the Warriors. Beck would go on to have a working career with starring roles in films like 1980's Xanadu, 1982's Megaforce, and guest appearances in shows like Walker, Texas Ranger, Babylon 5, and Murder, She Wrote. Now Mercy. Mercy is the girl who as Kristen just said, was really part of the Orphans crew. But she recognized what real tough guys were. She loved the warrior style, if not Michael Beck style. She's really, really feeling Michael Beck's character Swan. And she decides to leave the orphans and to roll with the Warriors and take her chances with the Warriors. She, I think that I love the way she played her role. I mean, this is a tough chick. She reminds you of a scrappy alley cat. I don't know. I can go. I just gush over her, and and how she played the role. Her name is Deborah. I don't know if I can say her name correctly. Deborah Van Valkenburg is who played Mercy. She started her career in the revival of Hair. After The Warrior, she went on to appear in films like Walter Hill's 1984 Streets of Fire, Rob Zombie's The Devil's Rejects. That was until 2005, much later. And she's probably most known for her role as Jackie Rush on the sitcom Too Close for Comfort. That was a staple, in the 80s. She would also guest star on shows like The Shield, Criminal Minds, and Castle. She played an excellent Mercy. To those watching, and I can tell you my interpretation at that time, I thought she was just a badass Puerto Rican, and I was completely wrong about her heritage, but She convinced me. So
Yeah, it did. I admit it did take me a second to warm to Mercy, just because, like, for me, I was like, girl, you are putting yourself in unsafe behavior. Like, for me, as a woman, I'm watching this and I'm like, girl, what are you doing? Like, you are
yes,
gonna get in trouble. But
yes.
like, as the movie went on, I definitely warmed to her and I understood where she was coming from. But definitely in the beginning, I was like, oh, like I was worried for her. I was definitely
Mhm.
not like, this girl's a badass. I was like, this girl's going to get herself hurt.
Yeah.
But she's
Uh,
cool though. I did like her as it went on. But yeah, that first impression, it took me a second to kind of get used to that kind of personality.
yeah. Well, and as we're kind of hinting at, she becomes a core part of the cast with the Warriors for the rest of the film, and again, similar to that, going through stunt school bonding stuff, trying to replicate that on screen and off screen. Once the guys realized like she didn't have a real dressing room of her own, a safe place to change. Like I can't remember at this point what the exact situation was. They the Warriors, all the male Warriors had a trailer, and they let her use their trailer and like to change for what she needed that day, and then she was just there and part of the gang the rest of the shoot. And that kind of helped with their bonding and bringing them closer together. Which was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. Really good to hear that kind of respect back in the 70s. Not to say people weren't respectful back then, but it's a
Yeah, yeah.
different
Yeah,
time.
we cut the budget for your own trailer, so you're gonna have to shack it up with everybody else.
Well, considering, again, like I'm surprised there were any trailers. I'm honestly surprised the, 6 or so guys, had a trailer at all, because, while this is a Paramount shoot, this is a fairly lean budget
Hmm.
for the day and age, um, for what it was. So.
Something else I had a thought of that I wrote down. So, how old are these guys supposed to be? Like, are these adults? Are these teenagers? Because to me, they look like adults, but like, I
Yeah.
think they're supposed to be teenagers. There's this Japanese anime called Tokyo Revengers, where the whole plot is like these different gangs in Japan that all want to join. And when you watch it, you're like, these kids are like 18 years old, 15 years old, and they're like 13, and you're like, what in the world? Like, I was not even thinking about this stuff at 13,
Right,
whatever.
right.
So like that it just reminded me of that. But yeah, do we know how old they're supposed to be?
So in the movie, to your point, it's, that Hollywood not clear. I'd even lean towards the movie makes them, like, portrays them less as teens necessarily and more, potentially like, into their 20s, you
Hmm.
know.
Agree.
Um, at least for the older ones. Some of the younger ones, like Rembrandt, could potentially still be seen as a teen character.
Hmm.
Uh, in the
Oh yeah.
book, they are very explicitly teens. Like the oldest are like 16, and the younger ones are like 13 or so, or
Yeah.
12.
That always
Um,
blows my mind when I think of like little kids doing like getting into
I,
gang stuff. Like I know it happens, but I'm like, go to school, go to bed.
yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
I
Makes me
tell you though,
nervous.
it's one of the reasons why, dare I say it, but this is a screaming for a remake. I mean, an
Yeah.
updated version. I would love to see that version if done
Yeah.
right. And not that I'm trying to see more kids get into violence, something like that. But if you can keep it kind of truer to this original story, but still update it, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it'd be a question of what are you really remaking, and we could talk about the status of the IP at the end, because
For sure, for sure.
like if you're remaking the Warriors movie that everyone knows and loves, and making it more modern, or leaning into the more futuristic aspects, the more fantastical elements, that's one thing. And then if you're making a new adaptation of the book and trying to make it more true to the book and reality, that's a completely different thing as well, so.
Yeah, I think the vibe will be different for sure. But
What about
yeah,
Snow
getting
White and the? Oh, never mind.
no, we'll save it for later. Yeah, so kind of getting back into the plot, we've already discussed how everybody's kind of coming after them. So the rogues now know that this hit is out for them, so they see the opportunity to try to take the Warriors down themselves. So they do try to do that at the 96th Street station in Manhattan. And at that station, the police chase the Warriors and they kind of get separated. And so Vermin, Cochise, and Rembrandt escape by boarding a subway car. And Fox, he is trying to fight off a police officer and he's thrown onto the tracks and killed by a passing train. And Mercy, she flees the scene. And then the other half of the group, Swan, Ajax, Snow, Cowboy, they're being chased by the baseball furies into Riverside Park. But that brawl is intense, but they do successfully take them down. And that pretty much goes to show like the running theme throughout this whole movie is that anytime anybody comes after them, they're just going to kick ass and continue to survive and keep going, which is always interesting. But I really liked the baseball furies. They were so silly. Them and like the mimes at the very beginning of the movie, like every time I saw like a different gang, I was like, what in the world? Like, and it's funny because the baseball furies kind of are like mimes too. Like they don't have any speaking lines, probably because they didn't want to pay them for speaking lines, but
Well, you just called out my Halloween costume in 1979 or 1980. I forget what year it impacted me, but yeah, man, I tell you, watching this and seeing a guy in a gang in baseball gear with cleats and bats with makeup like they're trying to look kind of intimidating makeup, but some of it comes off really funny looking, but it was so inspiring as a kid, and I loved it. It's one of my it's one of the best gangs in this movie. Great, great, great scene.
Well, it's like some of the.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's like some of the gangs in like some of the Batman comic books or the movies or cartoons or whatever where they might not be the most realistic, but in many ways they're the more memorable ones. And I mean that's I love a whole and so long as the world takes these goofy people seriously, then they're serious, and I love, world building like that, where it's this over the top kind of cartoonish world, but serious at the same time, I thought it was great that, and I loved all the gangs, the serious gangs, the goofy gangs,
Honestly, it was impressive that they could take them down while they had bats. Like they were just using their fists, and these guys had baseball bats. That definitely showed how impressive of fighters they're supposed to be.
Listen. I'm drinking the juice on this one because there were a few moments where you could see where the there was like
coordinated.
They paused, before the action started. Like you can see the pause, but you give it a little license.
Well, so they had part of the, I mentioned some of the reasons for training the actors. Another reason for that was because of like guild rules stuff or like budgetary stuff. They couldn't import any stunt people from the West Coast, so they were fairly limited on the stunt people they could get. So that was kind of where, not only for the look and feel they wanted, but they were, why they had to train the actors to do their own stunts. But they just didn't have as many stunt people as they really needed anyway, and especially with not having stunt people and not necessarily having the best stunt people and having actors who weren't professional stunt people doing a lot of stuff. Rob, to your point, sometimes it doesn't maybe look as good, it looks a little rougher. Some people say that adds to the realism, but also it also led to mistakes, and as we'll hear about a couple times in the movie, it's like, okay, yeah, no, this person like got hit in the face with a bat, or like this person got hit here or there, because oopsies. But the other cool thing they did with that scene was they were trying to figure out how to light it, and because it's supposed to be in the park and stuff, and Yeah. And the cinematographer eventually just said, screw it, and started putting lights up in the tree branches. Like,
It's funny it's funny because when you watch it, you kind of do, you notice the light and you're trying to like imagine, okay, is that a regular like street lamp or what's going on? Because there are some weird spotty lighting going on.
right,
I think I just thought of street lamps.
Yeah, well, and I
it's
think,
useful.
when you're focused on the story, you're not that like you're like if the story and the movie itself is good enough, you're not really paying like
hmm
that it doesn't matter where the light is coming from, which is I
Right.
think what the cinematographer ultimately decided. And honestly, it like it fits that kind of realistic but surreal
Yes.
look and feel anyway.
Right.
Like this is a world where you get strange lighting in a tree or something. It's like
Yeah. In a world.
because it's New York but not quite New York. So I was all good with it.
Yeah. Kristen, I know that you mentioned
Fox, right?
Fox being thrown into. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
I know
Yeah.
that you had something to say because I know you had feelings
yeah,
about cops throwing people on the train tracks. Is there
yeah.
something wrong with that?
I was just so like, how can a cop just kill someone like that without any
Uh,
repercussions? Just because it's a gang member? Like that was immediately
yeah.
when that happened. I was like, hang on, like what? Because like
Well,
first off, the fact that like yeah, people were dying, but like to have him killed in such like an offhanded way was crazy to me.
yeah. Well, to kind of explain how that happened, Rob, first tell us a bit about the actor playing Fox, and then I'll tell you
Yeah, Thomas G.
why
Waits for
that
sure.
scene is that scene.
Yeah, yes. So Fox at that moment is played by Thomas G. Waits. Waits studied at the the Juilliard, and also received a degree in writing from the New York, is it New York University, I believe.
No, it's
Um,
the news school.
I'm sorry, misread these notes here. His
No
relationship
worries.
with his relationship with the director Hill started off well, but quickly became rocky and was written out of the film 8 weeks into shooting. He would go on to appear other films like Injustice for All with Al Pacino, The Thing, one of my favorites with Kurt Russell, and McBain with Christopher Walken. He also would guest on TV shows like Oz, Homeland, and The Punisher. In 2000, he began a successful career teaching acting, and he continues to do so to this day. Tell me more
Yeah.
about Fox.
Well, I mean, don't piss off the director, but I mean, like
Or you'll get
literally
thrown onto
this.
train tracks?
Yeah, no, I mean, like he was supposed to be a major part of the rest of the movie. He was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to, uh, um, so originally he and Mercy were never supposed to be split up, and the romantic sub tension was supposed to be with them. Swan was supposed to get captured by I want to say, I'm trying to remember what the name of the group was. Um, but essentially it was a homosexual gang, and bad
Interesting.
things were potentially supposed to happen to him. He was going to
Whoa.
have to fight and escape. Uh,
I'm
but
glad they took that out.
yeah, no,
That wouldn't
especially
age very
for
well.
yeah. Um, and so they ended up removing that scene, all that stuff, and putting, combining a lot of what he was originally supposed to do with a lot of what Fox was supposed to do within the script, just because they were having these tensions. That's also why, if you watch the credits, you don't. Uh, uh, Waits is uncredited. He asked for his name to be removed from the film. Um,
Damn, he really was
so.
mad.
Yeah, no, they were both mad, and they both have since apologized to each other and chalked it up to, immaturity and stuff, so it
Mhm.
happens. Yeah, Rob, to your point, we definitely need to, because Carpenter's score is iconic for that. I think we have an excuse to talk about The Thing one of these days.
I will gladly talk about The Thing. I'll talk about any John Carpenter film. I love that guy.
Yeah, exactly. No, Carpenter is, well, and especially that, he's decided to retire from movies and just make music, play video games, and smoke pot. And he's awesome.
Good for him. Good for him.
The Warriors are on the run. The cops and other gangs are trying to hunt them down. Can they make it home? Can they prove they didn't kill Cyrus? Can they win the most important battle at the box office? Tune in to part 2 to find out. I've been your host, Adam. Thanks so much to my co-hosts, Kristen and Rob. Thanks to our editor, Hobby, and the rest of the Savage content team. Thank you to our sponsor, Jazzology, with Willard Jenkins. If you like the show, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, leave a comment, ring the bell, all the good YouTube things. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in part 2.